Let me start with some questions tonight. What was America's war on terror really about? Was it about gunning down terrorists? Or was it about killing civilians and bombing nations to control them? I'm sure you know the answer. I'm sure you've seen many headlines and exposés this year. Tonight we come to you with more proof. The United States is no guardian of human rights. It is guilty of war crimes. Let me show you some headlines from this year. The US drone strike in Kabul was a quote-unquote mistake. An American bomb killed 7 children. The US blamed it on faulty intel. Here's another one. US military concealed Syria airstrike that killed dozens of civilians. It led to one of the largest civilian death tolls in the war. But there was no punishment for the US. And this has become a trend. The United States of America bombs countries at will and gets away with it. That's because nobody is holding them accountable. Neither international agencies nor international media, and certainly not our leaders. So tonight we want to tell you about an American war crime, yet another American war crime. This one is from Syria. What did the US do? They ran a death squad, a secret mission. They ran it for 5 years. This group, the death squad, pounded Syria with more than 100,000 bombs and missiles. 100,000. They killed innocent civilians. How do we know about this? A recent report has exposed this secret strike cell. This group was called Talon Anvil. What is Talon Anvil? That's code name for a secret American military unit. It operated from 2014 to 2019 for 5 whole years. This unit was led by members of the Delta Special Forces. Delta is a special operations force of the US Army. They're elite soldiers. They're said to be the best of the best. So what were they doing with Talon Anvil? They were bombing Syria at will. They bombed whatever they thought was a target. This group was first stationed in Iraq. Then they were moved to northern Syria. The team had less than 20 officers. They worked round the clock and in 3 shifts. This was basically a 24/7 operation. Talon Anvil monitored what was happening on the battlefield. They had giant television screens. That's what they used to monitor action on the battlefield. And whenever they spotted something they thought was suspicious, they ordered a strike. Just like that. No background checks, no effort to verify any tip-offs. You see movement you don't like and you strike. That's how they operated for 5 years. How many bombs and missiles did they drop? 112,000. That's one estimate. 112,000 bombs in 5 years. Who were they hitting? These officers thought they were neutralizing terrorist convoys, car bombs, command centers, enemy fighters. But on the ground, these bombs were killing civilians, farmers, children on the street, families fleeing the war, villagers taking shelter inside buildings. They were all hit. And this went on for 5 years. Let me repeat that. Talon Anvil was killing civilians for 5 years. Did nobody notice? Did nobody object? The answers are yes and yes. Their actions were noticed and there was some protest. Some American pilots flying over Syria opposed Talon Anvil. On some occasions, they refused to drop bombs. Why? Because they were asked to hit quote-unquote questionable targets in densely populated areas. Officers from the CIA also complained. They were worried about what they called a disturbing pattern of strikes. Even within Talon Anvil, some members refused to participate in these airstrikes. But such interventions were few and far between. Also, they were ineffective. Many of these complaints went to top military leaders. What did they do? Reports say they chose to look the other way. For the most part, Talon Anvil did what they thought best because the system allowed it. And Talon Anvil did not just exist on paper. It had a top secret status. Almost every operation it undertook was highly classified. So there was no scope of external oversight or monitoring. Also, the unit itself took steps to hide its misdeeds. Reports say they prevented the collection of evidence. They turned away drone cameras during key moments of strike missions. So they did not allow their actions to be documented. And when there is no evidence, you can imagine how any investigation into this would pan out. Many officers, in fact, believed that civilian deaths were unavoidable. Allow me to quote what one officer told a newspaper off the record. This is what he said. The officer said, and I'm quoting, he saw so many civilian deaths, he eventually came to accept them as part of the job. The question is, who gave the US this job? To kill civilians in far-off lands and then justify it? Who will hold the US to account for this? The American war in Syria did not just inflict material damage, it took lives of innocents. Secret strike cells dropped bombs on civilians, and then they tried to hide that fact. Who will investigate these deaths? The US has not been honest about its war in Syria. The wide disparity in casualty numbers confirms that. Officially, the US-led coalition admits to a little over 1,400 civilian deaths during the Syria campaign, 1,400. Independent monitors give a much bigger number. They believe that there were anywhere between 8 to 13,000 civilian deaths. So the question now is America hiding its war crimes in Syria?